All right. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Byron Adams. I know we are seeing people file in right now, so we are so excited to have you. And thank you for joining our webinar today, really to do a deep dive and have a conversation about K-12 education market study that Tripod Education facilitated. We had a chance to talk to hundreds of educators around the country, and we are thrilled to discuss those results with you all and to also get a little bit of conversation through some of our polling built into the presentation and some other sort of engagement throughout this session. So we are thrilled to see you all today and have you join our session. I'll go ahead and get us started. Part of what we want to do is give an overview of the data today, and then really introduce you to some of the other work that Tripod Education leads around the country. So we'll start off with introductions to the panel you see here. I'll introduce myself first and then pass off to my colleague, Jan. My name is Byron Adams. I'm the vice president of Tripod. I have a background in surveys and methodology, working with organizations and schools for the last 15 years, really helping educators use data to empower decision-making and improve outcomes for children. With that, I'll pass it off to Jan.
Thanks, Byron. Hi, everyone. My name is Jan Alegre. I'm joining you all from San Diego, California. And I'm a researcher with Tripod Education. I'm interested in the ways that we can leverage survey insights gathered from students, teachers, and other education stakeholders to better understand learning experiences and to inform school and instructional practices. So good morning and good afternoon to everyone, and thanks for being here.
It's so exciting, Jan and Byron, to be here with both of you virtually. My name is Christina Strunk, and I'm an associate partner here on the Tripod and Education Elements team. Really excited to talk about the trends that we've seen from educators across the country. My background is a classroom teacher, instructional coach, and curriculum reviewer before joining this team. And I am usually calling in from St. Louis, but today I am a little further south in Austin, Texas. I don't know if you can see the map of Texas behind me, but really excited to be a part of this conversation today. We'll be using the chat if you have any questions or ideas, and we'll start off wanting to get to know who's in the room as well. So as always, when we have virtual communities like this, we want to start with our check-in question. So if you are able to access the chat and make sure that you are sharing this with everyone, you can choose between everyone or the host and panelists. But we want to just see who's here. So if you can take a moment and add to the chat your role, your school or organization, and your answer to the question, I'm here because I'm interested in or curious about fill in the blank. So we'll give folks a few minutes to add who they are, and we'll see what trends are coming across even in the group of us who is here together today.
Yeah, both of you are coming in from places much, much warmer than where I am, Chicago, right now.
I know. Did you end up getting a lot of snow?
We had a snow forecast that had blizzard conditions and it turned into rain, but I think later this week it'll turn back into snow. So we just have to wait a couple days.
Yeah, I was definitely thinking
70 degrees now in San Diego.
A little overcast, but nothing compared to rain and snow.
Right.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be a lot warmer here in Texas, but it's been pretty windy and cold. So great. Thanks, Erin. Welcome. Seeing the responses come in. We have some folks joining from Georgia, from Arkansas, the New Teacher Center.
Awesome. Yep. From Chicago. Welcome.
That's right. Oh, we have some international folks. Exciting. Adrian, thank you for joining. It seems like there are some trends coming through that we're really interested in how we can use this data to better improve the student experience, Also just thinking about what this might mean for teachers. I see some familiar names as well, maybe some folks that we've supported on our own projects. So welcome. We're really excited to dive into the results as well. So as you are adding in your information so that we can continue building that virtual community with who is here in the room today, what we're going to spend our time together over the next about an hour. We'll give an overview of Scholaris and Tripod, thinking about us as an organization. We'll dive into how this study was designed, what some of the key findings were, adding in some context from real life stories that we have seen this in practice. We'll think about what are maybe some potential next steps as we look across the trends. And then we'll have some time at the end for you all to ask questions. So if you have a question as we're going through, feel free to add it to the chat and we'll either respond in the moment or we'll save it for the end. And feel free to either reach out individually to the host and panelists or send it for everyone. One other thing that we want to just name is that if there's an example that you see one of the findings really in your practice, we'll have an opportunity to take a couple of polls to see how these trends align with your experiences. And we invite you to add in any additional insights into the chat as well. So a little bit about us at Scholaris. We are really thinking about how can we make sure that we are creating solutions to solve the biggest challenges in pre-K through 12th grade and higher education. We want to make sure that we're thinking about, as an organization, how can we think about data? How can we think about education services and curriculum to really provide innovative solutions? So today we're really going to be focusing on the work of Tripod, and I'll turn it over to Byron to talk a little bit more.
Thanks, Christina. Yeah, Tripod is part of this family at Scholaris, which we're really, really lucky to be a part of, seeing all of the strengths and solutions that my colleagues at Xanadu, at PLC Associates, and Education Elements offer to the schools that we serve. Really privileged to be part of this community. As Tripod, we are focused almost exclusively on data and diagnostics. So we work with educators across the world to administer surveys and then provide reports and insight coming from their community through surveys that we've designed or that we work with the schools to design any range of community members, from students to teachers, other staff, families, and other community members. And the schools we work with use that data to then empower their decision-making so they can really improve the impact of their work on their community and also be responsive to the things that their community are highlighting as needs and experiences. We are really lucky to be a trusted partner with the schools that we work with. And as a result of this work, it gives us an opportunity to kind of bring things together. We have this high level view. We talk to a lot of people every year. And so that's part of what sparked some of the process that we'll talk about here in this larger survey. Because we facilitate these processes so frequently, we thought, let's take a step back and talk to educators about some of the things that they see, in their experiences that we can also anticipate coming around the corner, and then share some of the insight with our community. So that's sort of the impetus and rationale for this session today. And we're really lucky to be part of that in this community. So we'll pass off to Christina to give an overview of some of the key questions here that we talked to our community about in this survey.
Great. So something that we really wanted to think about as we were reaching out to educators across the country, and that really drove the questions that we were asking and some of our trend analysis, are the 3 questions that you see on your screen right now. So we were really curious about what pressures and challenges are present, especially given this moment in time post-COVID. We want to think about also about what trends are influencing policies and purchases. So especially given some of the new legislation and decisions around the science of reading, new curriculum decisions, what's really emerging across the market. We were also thinking about, once there are those new policies and purchase decisions in place, what do we see is the support that's really valuable in implementing programs? So once you have this change, how can you make sure that those changes are supported and really meaningful for those learning communities? So throughout the findings that Jan will talk about in just a moment, these are the three pieces that really guided the work that we were doing. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jan to talk about how the survey was designed and then jump into some of the key findings.
Thanks, Christina. So nearly 800 educators from across the US participated in this market study, and the educators represented urban, suburban, and rural educational settings. The majority of them, about 84%, identified as teachers, and another 14% represented campus or district administrators. And in this study, the team wanted to better understand the changes that educators had implemented in their schools, what their planned focus has been in the current school year, and what challenges they were facing in their school improvement or school transformation work. So to do this, our participants answered several questions in a survey. This included what types of changes they were making or planning to make this year, the most challenging aspects of implementing these changes, and the type of support they thought their school or district needed in order to better support teachers in implementing new programs. Going on to the next slide, one key takeaway is that a lot of changes underway in schools across the country this year. Nearly 80% of educators we surveyed reported that they were implementing changes in at least one area, be it instruction, curriculum, student behavior, or strategic planning. And what's of particular interest is the area where most of this implementation is happening. 63% of educators reported that they were in the midst of implementing new curriculum programs this year, primarily in the science of reading, math, and English language arts, with about a third of these respondents indicating that there was an implementation of a new science of reading program underway.
Great. And that, I think, one of the things we'd love to do is get a sense from our audience of, based on the results here and that show a shift towards new curriculum programs in science of reading and math and ELA, how well do these changes align with your organization's curriculum outlook? So from your vantage point as a teacher or staff member in a district or school, we're going to pop up a poll question here to get your take on this, and then we'll have a discussion based on these results. All right, we'll take a couple minutes to give you all an opportunity to answer that. All right, so the results are coming in, and I'm seeing some mixed results so far. So we'll give everybody a minute more to respond. For this group, for Christina and Jan, when these results came in our initial market study, I mean, were there any surprises as you all reviewed them? From my vantage point, I felt that this was somewhat expected, but I wonder what you all think about that.
Yeah, I think given the conversations that we're having across the US, we're seeing a lot of new legislation that, in conversations with district leaders, are really pushing new curricular decisions for the next school year. So this year is really a moment where we're thinking about what are the changes that we need to make, especially given some of the legislation around science of reading that's coming through, and some curriculum programs that we need to either abandon or move towards. I think that this is definitely starting in the process, or that people are having a sense that we're going to need to make those choices.
Okay. Yeah. I'm actually just noticing this question we popped up, I think should have come up a little later in our presentation. So, let's save these results, and apologies to the audience. We'll pop up the right question later. This will come up later in our results review, but yeah, absolutely. Agree with that. So
let's do this one.
Let's end this poll. I don't know if we can pop up the right question.
Got it. And there we go. Backwards order on our end. It's interesting to see these results come in too, and where there's a lot of alignment.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm wondering in the chat, for those of you who are adding in that this is aligned with your experiences, is there a particular subject area or content that you're seeing this happen more in? Does it tend to be along the lines of math? Is it ELA? Yeah, seeing science and reading really as a focus area across different areas. Thanks, Samantha. Lynn, that's a really interesting point. Thinking about how research-based practices or the reading science has made its way or not made its way into different classrooms, different regions, and also thinking about how do we make sure that we're adding in the multilingual research. Thank you for including those voices.
Right. Yep. I see comments about state mandates absolutely factor in these decisions as well.
So we'll close this poll so that you all can see the results on your side. But it looks like we're much more in the very well aligned or somewhat aligned, and in the chat, really seeing that science of reading or ELA is the focus area within your context as well.
Wow. That's it's great to see the results, and thank you all for participating in this. Really, wanted to give a chance for you all to weigh in after seeing the results, and we'll have a couple other questions throughout this presentation, so we can get your feedback on how well aligned or how much it resonates with your experience in your classroom or in your school. All right, so let's go to our next category and key finding.
Okay, professional learning is critical. With these new curricula changes in mind, educators were asked what they thought was needed in order to support teachers aside from time and money. 56% of our respondents indicated that the most critical need was better professional learning for teachers. There's a need to provide professional development support so that teachers can implement new curricula well and account for these changes in their instructional practices. What also stood out was that over half of the educators identified partnership and transparency as important needs. 51% noted that it was important to ensure that teachers and students had a voice in designing and influencing strategic plans for their school or district. And then 51% noted that it was important that schools and districts more clearly communicate their vision for new programs that are introduced.
Yeah, professional learning, absolutely, critical key finding here in the results. We'll shift into our conversation here. So one of the things that the study brought out was a need for better professional learning from teachers, from the respondents. So we wanted to get a sense from you all of how satisfied you are with the current professional learning opportunities in your organization. And so we'll pop up the poll for this question.
And I think we got it in the right order this time.
I think this one is the right order.
Great. Look at how quickly that improvement happened.
Right. These polls are great. I mean, it's just such a easy way to get the audience feedback. I love it.
Yeah, and thinking, Linda, of your point that you added into the chat around one-time professional development doesn't fit the need that we're seeing, and that came through in the study as well, that the more impactful experiences is a cycle of professional learning where there's that consistent growth and through lines. Yeah, thank you all for adding in different metrics of what high quality professional learning looks like. And in the districts that we're supporting, where we have the most traction is when there are professional development opportunities that are really sustained. There are, Jennifer, to your point, thinking about those accountability measures of here are the things that we're going to commit to, here are the things that we're going to be really looking for as we go through classroom walkthroughs and observations. So those are the places where we're really thinking about making sure we're building towards. And we'll end the poll so that you all can see the results as well. But it's interesting to think about in this space, Byron, there's a different distribution here than there was previously.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're measuring this in this question level of satisfaction. But yes, I mean, looking at the respondents here, almost half are somewhat satisfied. Not as many on the extremely satisfied in this category, which is telling us something. And, as you're thinking about the experience as you're kind of going through that professional learning, all of those things really matter from in order to impact the level of satisfaction and ultimately the outcomes on students.
Yeah, something that this made me think about was a district that we support in Northern Virginia, and the way that they're really designing their professional learning opportunities is a series of pathways around a specific instructional model that they're really trying to adopt. And that there are, to the points that are coming through in the chat, that there's a series of ways that you can participate. We have learned a lot from COVID and remote learning. So there's an asynchronous learning track. There's a cohort learning model where people can go through the material with a set of their peers and identify what are the things that they're going to take back to their schools, in addition to more of an a la carte option. So it's really interesting thinking about not only what is the content for professional learning, but also the ways in which that experience is designed at the district level.
All right, let's advance into our next key finding.
All right, so the educators in this study were asked to rate what's been particularly challenging for them as they've engaged in school improvement or school transformation work. One key takeaway is that educators identified time as a significant headwind. In addition to naming poor professional learning supports as a challenge, more than half of them identified too many demands or changes and limited time to learn and collaborate as factors hindering school improvement. I think it's important to note that these challenges are being named, and they've been previously identified by researchers as some of the causes of teacher burnout. These are issues that districts may need to be continually mindful of as they invest in attracting new teaching talent and retaining experienced teachers. So curious what y'all think about that.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I'm looking, before we get into the poll, I'm looking in the chat and seeing Tim and Lynn's points around the kind of sustainability and sustained efforts when there's something that is new. And I think oftentimes what we see is initiative overload or decision fatigue, as there are all of these policy decisions that are coming down, where someone who's been in the field for many years has seen all of these changes come and go. So how do you think about what you're really going to jump onto? So how do we make sure that as we're designing those systems where we say this is the change that we really believe in and that we're going to move towards, so that you get people, you build the right team, that you're thinking about having the correct vision and aligning it to the team that you have too. So thanks, Tim. Thanks, Lynn.
Great, yeah, and to open it up to the rest of our audience in the form of another poll question, we have a couple more of these. This is one of our last ones, but considering the challenges of this limited time and collaboration, too many demands or changes, how effectively do you feel your school or district is managing these changes, these challenges? We're seeing the results come in.
And as the results are coming in, it makes me think, I'll put it in the chat too, but a lot of the way that we approach designing some of these experiences, or what we're really going to focus on with particular implementation or change management, is with that Noster-Lippitt model for change. If that's something that's familiar to the people on this call, or if it's a new resource, we can include it in the follow-up too. But I think about those different ingredients that are really important, and collaboration is one that comes through often. Of we either don't have a built-in time to our schedule for people to collaborate, or we have the time, but it gets taken away by other things. So it's definitely a tension area that we try and focus around. So I see that most people have responded to the poll, so we'll go ahead and share the results from this one so that we can talk about it. Byron, what are you seeing
Yeah.
as you look across here?
Right. Well, I mean, absolutely no one identified it very effectively in terms of managing these challenges. 30%, but the majority of our audience is either neutral or thinking their experiences at their organization is not managing these effectively, these challenges. So, from the experience of what Jan referred to earlier is, this really being one of the key areas for teachers, especially, that could contribute to things like burnout. And we see some of the broader data nationwide, with nearly half of teachers reporting high rates of burnout. There was a study to that effect last year through Gallup. We know that this is extremely important for issues of retention. And I think, we're seeing that reflected in our audience with very few people even, saying that their district is somewhat effectively managing challenges with limited time. What are you all thinking about both the data in our study and some of what we're seeing in the audience?
Yeah, I'm wondering, given the variety of roles and contexts that we have here today, what effective change management looks like in your context. I see, Patty has added around trust between teachers and central office. What else comes up that we want it to look like? Linda, seeing that there are really clear long-term plans and some of those milestones along the way, so that it doesn't feel like either it's a flash in the pan or you don't know if you're making progress on the things that you're really trying. That clear timelines are really important too. I also think about who has the information. So if you have ideas and resources and a plan with clear timelines and success metrics, is it just central office or one team who has that information, or are there mechanisms in place for communication? How do we make sure that the people who are involved in the plan or may need to know more information have access to that too? Linda, that de-implementation is so hard and so important. What are you letting go of to make sure that you have room for the new things that you're taking on? I know sometimes it's really, really hard to let go of something, especially as people have put time, energy, effort, and heart into something. So as we're adopting or adjusting to new changes, keeping that in mind, it takes a lot of effort. Erin, that idea of selling the vision. And creating room for responsive plans, that what we're doing today is the right answer for right now, and how do you make sure that you're leaving room for tomorrow too, and that's a really exciting process. Maybe we can all copy that line from Linda, and then we can start practicing it.
Well, great. Thank you all for the comments on this question. I think we'll move to our next key finding in the presentation, unless there's anything else before we advance from Christina or Jan. All right. Let's go to key finding 4 on informed decision making.
All right. Following up on the topic of change management, the survey asked educators to rate how well their institutions did with certain things when they were making decisions related to student success. On average, respondents felt that their schools and their districts used data and research well when they were making decisions, and they did a good job of including diverse perspectives. But they also rated their organizations slightly lower on knowing who owned the next steps of the decision-making process, their ability to weigh their staff's capacity to make changes, and their willingness to spend more to implement these changes well. So curious to get everyone's thoughts on those findings.
This seems to go back to that idea of trust and buy-in that different groups have for each other. How well do we understand what the other team is doing, and do we trust that that's in the best interest and the long-term vision of the district or the organization as a whole?
Absolutely. So we actually don't have a poll for this question, but I think we can, just kind of discuss this in the context of the other key findings towards the end of our presentation here. So I'll advance this to the next slide so that we can learn a little bit more about student success data.
All
and the
right.
results.
So while educators rated the use of data and research as being fairly positive when making decisions, they were also surveyed about what kind of data they wanted their leaders to use more of to better understand whether their students were succeeding. So if you look at this chart here, 60% of our respondents indicated they wanted their leaders to make more use of behavioral data, followed by student progress data, for example, in the form of test or quiz scores or homework completion. Classroom observations came in third, followed by anecdotal data from the teachers who are working directly with students. And these top-rated data sources suggest that educators are seeing the value of using observable and objective information captured directly from the field, which can be useful in understanding the nuances of students' day-to-day learning experiences. Lower on the list were attendance data, conversations with students, and student voice surveys and district benchmarks. Maybe it doesn't necessarily mean that we want to see less of it, but perhaps these respondents were satisfied with the amount of data collection that was happening in these areas.
Yeah, I'm curious in the chat, thinking about within your own context, since we have such a variety of spaces, what are the data sources that you all are prioritizing for school leaders or educators to think about if students are successful or not? Because I know that oftentimes in the conversations that I'm having, there's either focus on one particular data set, and then we find that we need to gather additional data, or on the flip side, that there are too many data sources and we need to make sure that we're sifting through them and prioritizing. So curious, what's resonating with folks in the chat? What are some of the data sources that you all are using or have found to be really compelling?
Yeah, one of the other things that when I look at the data, the sorts of data and the results here is, how easily accessible are all of these data points by educators, right? So when you are trying to take a step back and think about whether students are successful, how easy is it to really take stock of things like progress for students, and taking away some of the, disparate observations, and things that may have been observed, in a more informal setting, but really applying it to understanding, student by student, whether they're on track for success, maybe combining a lot of these together to really take stock of all of that at once is something we're seeing in this data as well.
Yeah, coming through in the chat, I'm seeing that there's maybe some interesting reactions to the type of data that we see as teachers really wanting school leaders to use. And maybe there's a space for if there aren't alignment conversations beforehand, that these might be more subjective given what we might see or focus on in behavioral data or in classroom observations. I also see this idea of focus groups coming up. So creating spaces where there's a more nuanced conversation, that we're able to gather more experiences as well. But you're right, Lynn, that is a practice that in order to do well, there's a lot of moving pieces. So thinking about how do you build those systems too.
Right. And also the alignment, see comments around, larger trends and what teachers are saying, and that maybe there have been some shifts in the last few years that we're seeing reflected in some of the survey data around, changes in behavior in classrooms and needing more data to maybe support some of the sort of ad hoc or anecdotal experiences that individual teachers are having.
Something that I'm thinking about too, or some of the, like within a survey like the 7 C's, Byron, that those components of care or classroom management, if there are students who understand what the structures and expectations are in class and feel like they are seen and heard as individuals, to Tim's point, that student who is engaged can perform better because they're able to focus on the rigor and the work of the academic content as well.
Right.
Great. Thank you all for sharing in the chat what data sources you're using and your reactions to these trends.
So, all right. Next key finding, how teachers are spending time.
Yeah, so as we highlighted before, educators name time as a barrier to school improvement efforts in addition to professional learning support needs. So in the survey, the educators were also asked, based on their observations, how teachers were spending their time. On average, educators reported that teachers spent almost a quarter of their time teaching the whole class, followed by about 12% of their time on classroom management, which is indicated or consistent with this indicated need for support around student discipline and behavior. On average, about 11% of teacher time was spent on facilitating small group instruction, which research has shown is beneficial for the purpose of personalizing instruction, providing feedback, and increasing student participation. So these findings indicate that teachers may need some further support from their school and their district leaders to shift more of their time to small group instruction and to help address some discipline concerns.
Right. And to get some feedback from our audience, we have a poll question. And so the final poll question here, reflecting on the finding that teachers are spending more time on whole class teaching compared to small group instruction, how does this compare to your experience or observation in an educational setting? So the poll we'll put up has a few options. Strongly agree would mean that your experience is similar here, all the way down to strongly disagree, which is that your experience is different. And we'll leave that up for a minute and then discuss the findings.
Yeah, it's interesting too, Jim, to your question, and we'll touch more on this when we get to the Q&A, but thinking about, given the trends and changes now, how has teacher time shifted? And especially as there are changes in the curricular programs that we're using or the instructional models that we're moving towards, Jan, to your point around some more small group instruction, more personalized experiences, making sure that we're reaching each and every student, especially given some of the gaps that have emerged or been enhanced through COVID, that teachers might need more support in understanding how to use these high quality curricular materials and things like that too. So it's really interesting. We'll end the poll here. It looks like most folks have responded to share the results. Byron, as you see these, what comes to mind? What are you thinking?
Well, I strongly agree is really popping, especially for this question. So, over about half of our respondents here who answered the question are, telling us that their experience is similar, and we can kind of see that in the chat as well. where they're seeing teachers are spending more time on whole class teaching compared to small group instruction. So depending on the context of the roles in education, I know there'll be some variance there, but very, very, interesting to see about half of our audience agrees with that. And then another 23% of the respondents here are saying they somewhat agree. So well over half of our audience is agreeing in some way with this statement.
Yeah, and to Lynn's point in the chat that we got really comfortable maybe with during remote instruction with technology, with students experiencing different digital programs, but thinking about when we're back in the classroom, how can we make sure to balance that instruction maybe for a specific intervention program or filling a specific need for an extension opportunity, but making sure that there really is that high quality student to teacher and student to student interaction as well. Perfect. And I know that there are a couple of points that are added to the chat. We'll get to some of those in the Q&A, but want to make sure that we have time for our last finding.
Right. So finally, the educators in this study were asked about what trends and factors were influencing the policies and purchases in their district. So while recent trends in political activism, book bans, and increased behavior issues influenced districts' policies more than spending, spending was most influenced by resource needs, for example, new building infrastructure, security, attracting new teaching talent, expanding counseling services, and tutoring students.
Okay. All right, great. Well, thank you, Jan, for giving an overview of our key findings. Given the time, I will advance us to our next section, so we have enough time for Q&A, and we can circle back to any of these key findings as we see questions come in about them. But thanks so much to Jan and Christina and our audience for your participation in the polls. Love that. So since we spent some time kind of going through the report, I wanted to make sure you all have access to this study. So we just released this publicly this week. Really excited about the findings here. We presented a summary of that, but there's a lot more interesting information in the full study. So if you want to save this link, we'll also send out the deck here, and it's available on the Tripod website. But wanted to make sure you all have access to the full study to review, on your own time, and really excited to have this in the field and seeing the engagement around this as well in this webinar. So one of the reasons why we've, why Tripod and Scholaris were really interested in this study is because we wanted to understand some of the experiences and learnings from educators directly. And one of the major things that we saw in the results here is about 80% of educators are in the midst of implementing some kind of change right now in their schools or organizations. That ranges from all kinds of things, but as we know, and I've seen in the comments as well, we know coming out of COVID, it being in a time that we are, there is a lot of change happening, whether it's curriculum, strategic plans, or behavioral programs. And, if we had done this study prior to COVID, we might see similar study or similar outcomes because change is always a priority. But actually, following through and sustaining that change is hard. And we can kind of see from the educator perspective, some of the experiences and feedback there in terms of the experience. So sustaining that change is hard. So successful implementation is actually what helps to convey going from the implementation of the change into the results. And one of the key factors from the Tripod perspective in this is understanding the community voice, understanding from students, staff, teachers, and families, and other members of a community. how they are participating in the school changes as they happen, informing those changes before they're rolled out, sustaining some of the implementation and giving feedback on that during those changes, and all the way through to the end of the process in the life cycle of change management. So knowing that student voice and community voice is extremely important. Tripod is a critical partner to districts around the country in conveying that. We work with districts on actually capturing the things like effectiveness of classrooms and instruction, talking directly to students. Tripod was founded almost 20 plus years ago, and our core survey, it really talks to students about their teacher and classroom experiences. One of the things that we work with schools really closely on is getting the data from this high level of collecting it and sort of at a school level into a classroom and into teachers' hands, so that as they are going through their own professional development and their own improvement, they have data to inform the student perspective as they can understand what those student experiences look like. We also make it really easy for principals and other teams that support teachers to bring that data to bear so that they can actually use that to coach and improve the experiences of the teachers as they're working, and also from the student perspective. Having done this for a long time, Tripod has the perspective of lots of inputs, so we can share the context of that data as well through things like benchmarks. And that is a core part of the support that we offer, and one of the reasons why we were in a great position to facilitate the study and have a conversation like this with our audience. Our surveys are all validated by research, and really one of the things that we try to do in our survey is bringing in the large body of research into a really easy to use survey, so that we can take sort of the methodology, some of the things that Jan discussed at the outset for this survey, and apply it into classroom and other surveys throughout schools around the country and the world. And one of the things we're really excited about is not just one classroom survey, but the way that we've grown. So now we're offering surveys on a ton of different topics, from student engagement to teacher perception and leadership, DEI surveys, social emotional learning, and school climate. So we've taken that core part of our work of working within validated survey instruments and applied it to multiple topics that schools need support with. And so before we go into our sort of Q&A, I wanted to also kind of say at the outset that we'll be presenting on a lot of the learnings that we've uncovered, especially coming from the perspective of over a decade, of almost 20 years now, in surveys at a presentation at the National Conference on Education in San Diego next month. So we'll be holding roundtable sessions where we really get to back up, showing the perspective of we issued a study 14 years ago with the Gates Foundation. And now that we have the perspective of years of implementation, what have we learned? So we'll have a chance to review that at the AESA conference, and really looking forward to that as an opportunity to further engage. So if any of you all are there, we look forward to the opportunity. All right, and with that, we will open it up to questions and answers, and we're seeing those come through the chat now.
Yeah, so as you all are thinking about other questions that you might have, there are a few that have come through in the last few minutes, and the first one is around the first finding. Around 63% of respondents reported that they are in the midst of implementing new curricular programs. So there was a question around whether that 63% is higher or lower than previous years. So Jan, maybe that's a question that you can start off, and then we can add some more context.
So since this study was conducted just this year, we don't have any sort of trend data to speak to whether this is higher or lower than previously. One thing that I would note is that the educators were asked sort of what the focus of their implementation plans were prior to this year. And I think what was interesting about that is that almost 70% of those educators reported that the primary focus was not on curriculum, but it was on implementation of new programs that were focused on student wellness, student enrollment and behavior. And I think this is possibly as a response to the pandemic and the impact that school closures and shifts to remote learning may have had during that time. Research on the impact of the pandemic on education has highlighted some concerns about student well-being and chronic absenteeism. So perhaps that's why the focus was larger on that last year. And now this year, there seems to be this continuation of that trend, but with increased focus on curriculum.
Yeah, thank you for adding that context, Jan. And it sounds like there's the potential to get some more trend data to provide that understanding as we think about next year. And then maybe that's another question that we can explore too. Thank you. The second question that came through was around why science of reading was teased out from ELA. So why were they two separate areas as we're talking about these findings? I'm wondering maybe Byron, if you start out, unless Jan, you want to.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure why the science of reading. I mean, I think as a concept, we may want to disaggregate a bit more of that information to get that specific feedback from the respondent group as they're reflecting on general ELA and science of reading. But absolutely, those topics are connected.
Right. I think that science of reading was particularly called out since some of our clients have been interested in science of reading implementation. So really to gauge more of that fine-grained data in comparison to sort of ELA in general.
Right. Yeah, when you're seeing some specific interest, it might be helpful to know from the respondent groups exactly how they feel about that sort of laser targeted term, broken out from the larger term.
And I imagine that as we see different policy shifts, maybe there is math as another focus area that if we continue to give this study and again do that idea of trends over time, that new keywords will emerge as well.
Right, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you're looking at terminology, those often change. We're trying to in the research that we're conducting, we really want to meet the moment and use common terms, that 10 years from now, we don't quite know what terms of the day will be, but in today, we know science of reading is a key topic that people are really interested in and talking about. So we wanted to weigh in there and show some feedback from the respondent groups.
Yeah, and especially Patty, Samantha, and Lynn, as you're sharing in the chat, we have seen those legislative changes and how different districts are responding to those and kind of the timelines and support around whether this is a funded mandate, whether it's something that people are just starting to talk about, or whether there are real accountabilities to making changes of getting rid of old curriculum, and how complicated that process can be. Yeah, Jim, that's a really interesting term to bring in too. The last question that we have so far is feel free to add in more questions as we're going through. But we had a question around whether we have data on how teacher time has changed. So thinking about that finding of how teachers were spending their time. Jan, I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit, again, knowing that this is the first time that we were conducting this study.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have any of that trend data, but definitely something to think about if we're going to carry this study forward in the future. I think there are other data sources that we can kind of turn to look at how teachers are spending their time. I'm sort of thinking about other national large-scale assessment survey data from the National Assessment of Educational Progress. They've kind of asked similar questions on how teachers have been spending their time on different subjects. So that's another reference point where we can sort of, if we are going to ask this question again, we can kind of cross-check and see sort of how consistent are these respondent groups from two separate surveys kind of answering similar questions.
Yeah, Jan, also seeing in the chat this idea of focusing on inside and outside the classroom too.
Yes,
And
definitely.
it's interesting to think about too, as new curricular programs are being adopted, a lot of the rationale for those adoptions is it will cut down on teacher time and teacher preparation and finding resources outside of the school day. So thinking about, will that time change as a result of having programs that are a little bit more robust and maybe have some of those supplemental resources and things? I see a question as well from Tim. Maybe this in the last couple of minutes is a place where we can kind of end on. In doing your research, do you collect information on years of services to disaggregate the data? So what does some of that demographic data look like?
So for this particular study, we didn't collect that information on years of service. I do know that for some of our teacher surveys, we do ask about years of service in order to kind of get at teacher perceptions of professional development and how that relates to sort of years of experience that they've had under their belt. Allows us to kind of pinpoint where professional development needs are needed, whether that's more with new teachers or things like that. So I think that's an excellent point of one other demographic variable that we should take into account when conducting a similar study in the future.
Yeah, and this idea too of thinking about reaching out to people who were in the classroom who aren't as well. Yes, thank you for bringing that up. This is, thank you for these rich questions that helped us to unpack some of the findings and also give us some direction on what are things that you're really interested in as we think about the next study that we do. So thank you all for that portion, and I'm going to turn it over to Byron to close this out.
Well, thank you all for your engagement. Love the questions coming in that came in through the chat and also your poll questions. So thank you so much for joining. I shared the link for the report and we'll be sending that out to you all again. Another reminder about AESA coming up next month, which we're really excited about. And just an opportunity to sign off for the group. You know, from my vantage point at Tripod as a vice president, we are eager to get more and more engagement with our audience. So I'm sharing my email here, as well as our general email. If you're interested in learning more about our research, other research questions that you might have too about either your district or the broader education ecosystem around the country, we conduct research on both. So really excited to partner with you all, learn more about you, and to hear from you in the coming weeks and months. So my